Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the launch of Helen Fields' new novel, The Shadow Man. I'm Vic Watson, one half of the Bay Tales team, and behind the scenes tonight, we're ably assisted by the better half of the team, Simon Buick. We're here to celebrate tomorrow's release of The Shadow Man. To chat about the event, tag us @_Bay Tales and use good luck sleeping if you're talking about the book, because you're going to need good luck sleeping once you read it. It is terrifying. If you haven't already, please do order The Shadow Man from Forum Books to receive a signed book plate from Helen. I appear to have put lots of tongue twisters in my notes tonight, so good luck with that. We are delighted this evening to have several special guests joining us. The first of which is Helen Huthwaite, who is publishing director at HarperCollins. She's going to say a few words about The Shadow Man. So everybody, a huge round of applause for Helen Huthwaite.
Hi everyone, I'm Helen Huthwaite. I'm publishing director at Avon, and I also have the absolute pleasure of being Helen's editor. I want to say a few words tonight, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you back to the heady days of February 2016. We were young, carefree, and we were just signing our first ever contract with Helen Fields. If I'm honest with you, it felt like it was meant to be from day one. I had been hunting for a new Scottish crime series, and when Helen's book, Perfect Remains, landed in my inbox, it felt like a gift. And that has continued to be the case from that moment on, because I speak not just as Helen's editor, but as one of her most ardent fans. The job of editor feels like the greatest privilege at the best of times, but never more so than when you're reading a book that you absolutely love from start to finish. And this has truly been the case for each and every novel that I've worked on with Helen over the last 5 years. And what a 5 years it has been! That first book, Perfect Remains, has gone on to sell over 250,000 copies, gathering legions of fans along the way who have been hooked on the Luke and Ava series and love it just as much as we all do at HarperCollins. There are many things that make the author-editor relationship work, but the biggest of these is trust, closely followed by patience. I can safely say that Helen has both of these qualities in abundance, not least because when I first mooted the point about stepping away from the series to write a standalone novel, she listened with understanding and endless good grace. So why, tell me why, are we not being treated to another Luke and Ava novel just yet? And as a side note, I really promise they are not gone forever. It's because at Avon and HarperCollins, we recognise talent, another quality that Helen has by the bucket load. We knew she had a big book in her, and The Shadow Man is just that. From the moment I first read it, it was clear that Helen had outdone herself by delivering a villain who's one of the most memorable I've ever met, two new protagonists in Connie and Barda who will steal the affections of even the most avid Luke and Ava fan, and a concept that quite simply blew me away. It's yet another gift from Helen, and I want to thank her for having the trust in us to write this, the big book, and the one that we think is going to be her biggest break yet. So please raise a glass of whatever you have beside you and toast to Helen, author extraordinaire.
Helen, thank you for that. Other Helen, so many Helens. Okay, so let me introduce you to Helen Fields, the author of The Shadow Man. Helen Fields is a former criminal and family law barrister, best known for writing the D.I. Calenach series set in Edinburgh. The last book in the series, Perfect Kill, was longlisted for the Crime Writers Association Ian Fleming's Steel Dagger in 2020. Ooh! And two others have been longlisted for the McIlvanney Prize. In 2020, Perfect Remains was also shortlisted for the Bronze Bat, the Dutch debut crime novel of the year. Helen also wrote legal thriller Degrees of Guilt as H.S. Chandler. Her books have now been translated into 16 languages, also sell in the USA, Canada and Australasia, and her books have won global recognition. And as Helen Huthwaite said, I think we're all fairly confident that you are going to love The Shadow Man. So let me tell you about the book that you are going to be most compelled to devour. Elspeth, Meggie and Xavier are locked in a flat. They don't know where they are and they don't know why they're there. They only know that the Shadow Man has taken them and he won't let them go. Desperate to escape, the three of them must find a way out of their living hell, even if it means uncovering a very dark truth. Because the Shadow Man isn't a nightmare, he's all too real, and he's watching. So everybody please at home give a huge round of applause for the lovely Helen Fields. Hello.
Hi.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Vic. Thank you so much for doing this and for everyone for coming and watching, all the readers and everyone involved. I really appreciate it. It's a hugely exciting evening. The night before publication day is a really great night and it's lovely to be able to share it.
Brilliant. Now, before we launch into our guest questions, I do have a question for you. Given the fact that the Shadow Man is an absolutely tremendous antagonist, who are some of your favourite antagonists in literature and film?
You know, the book I always come back to for this is Silence of the Lambs. And I think when Thomas Harris created Hannibal Lecter, he set the bar so high it was almost impossible to touch it, because he did something extraordinary, which was that he created a bad guy who you were fascinated by, and you weren't just repelled by, you were really deeply interested in him, and you were also rooting for him. I mean, the bizarre thing about that, the book, and the book's beautifully well written, is that all the way through, you want this terrible, bloodthirsty, awful, cannibalistic man, and you do actually want him to escape. And I think there's a real art to that. I think being able to write someone who is terrifying and creepy and dangerous and scary, but who you also have a level of empathy for, is an extraordinary thing to be able to do. And I think he's the ultimate for me.
Excellent, thank you for that. Okay, so our first guest interviewer this evening is Claire Allan. Claire Allan is herself a best-selling author from Derry in Northern Ireland, and her latest book, Ask No Questions, is out now. So I'm going to hand you over to Claire.
Hello.
Hi, Claire.
Hi, Helen. It's absolutely lovely for me to be here this evening and help me celebrate this brilliant book. As you know, I'm a huge fan of it, and I echo everything that the other Helen has said. I started reading this book and I couldn't put it down. I had to find out what was happening. I think there's such a unique hook in it. There's such a brilliant character in it. You just talked there about a character that is wrong and evil, but you find great empathy for him, and you do with the character in this book, despite the fact he is probably one of the scariest men that I have ever read. So I was completely wowed, I have to say, to hear Helen Huthwaite there say that, you know, this was a challenge to you. You were asked to write a standalone book. Had this character been nipping away in your head for a while, or did he come out of that challenge itself?
He did come out of the challenge. I think when I wrote Perfect Crime, so one in the Canon series, I was starting to look at psychological syndromes, and when I was researching that, I found Cotard syndrome, and I'll be careful this evening not to spoil things too much for everybody who hasn't read it and get hold of it yet. But Cotard syndrome is otherwise known as walking corpse syndrome. It's very real, and it's actually, for the people who suffer from it, is very, very horrible and terrifying. And I think I found that, and I think what I did was I stored, you know what it's like when you're researching a book, you store a little bit of your nugget of information away and somewhere in the back of your brain, and you know it's a good one when it won't quite leave you alone. And so when I was thinking about standalones, and Helen Huthwaite would say, we chewed through a number of ideas before we got to what felt like the right one. It was that thing about this syndrome, this walking corpse syndrome, that came back to me, wouldn't leave me alone. So it wasn't so much that I saw Fergus himself, but I definitely had an idea of somebody suffering from this walking corpse syndrome and what it would do to you psychologically. So really that's why it came out of a previous book, came out of previous research. I'm fascinated by psychology. It's something that you can't separate that from criminal or criminal books, you know, that sort of thing. The psychology is what builds the interest, the human interest. I'm just reading, well, I've just finished reading actually, your latest, which is brilliant.
Thank you.
And it's the same thing, actually, you know, really interesting, looking back at a cold case and trying to pick through the psychology and trying to pick up clues with your journalist and kind of interviewing people and try and pick up the clues on that. And it's the same thing. Psychology is what drives all good crime fiction.
I absolutely agree, and that's what fascinates me as a writer, to actually sit down and try to get inside somebody's head. Of course, Fergus is the eponymous Shadow Man, but you have a number of other brilliant characters in this book. And the pairing of Connie and Barda, now please tell me, I know this is written as a standalone novel, but I'm going to beg you on behalf of readers who haven't even read it yet, will there be more of Connie and Barda, please?
I don't have an answer for that yet. There's definitely the scope. The ending is open. I've been quite taken aback by the way the level of warmth there's been towards Connie, because the main character in this, Dr. Connie Wallline, who's a forensic psychologist, and she's a profiler, and she's quite a brash, she's American, she's quite brash, but not in a kind of American Disneyland kind of, you know, way that we think of brashness, but she's incredibly direct. She's very open, she's very honest, and she's never pulls her punches. And actually people were able to read through the first few pages of that and take her as they found her, and then develop a real warmth for her. I wasn't actually expecting that to the extent that the feedback I got. I think she's a fascinating character. I'd love to write another book with her. I do think there's somewhere for her and Brady Barda, the police officer, to go, because they're polar opposites that seem to work well together. And so I very much hope that there will be another Connie and Brady Barda book to come. I think profiling is endlessly fascinating. I think we are fascinated with the work that these people do. And certainly I'd like to write a bit more and explore that a bit more.
Oh, I think she's brilliant, and I totally get what you're saying about being a character that somewhere you sort of think you shouldn't like her because she's so brash and she's so direct, and especially I think in this country, in this part of the world, where we're very much don't be brash and don't be direct. But she has a kind of Eleanor Oliphant quality to her, in that she just says it as it is, and because she is honest and she wears everything on her sleeve, so to speak, you do form that real affinity to her, and by the end of the novel, you are chanting for her and cheering for her. It is a very dark novel, and really very disturbing in some places. Definitely, folks, not one for reading late at night with the lights out. Daytime reading only. How far is there a line, I suppose, that you wouldn't cross when it came to writing psychological thrillers or crime fiction? Is there any part of you that ever just goes, no, that's a little bit too dark? I'm trying not to put spoilers on here. I must talk to you about this off the record sometime, but how do you figure out what your comfort zone is for your readers?
I've never written about the killing of a child. I know other people are able to do that, and I think partly because when I write in a very I show most of what I'm talking about, and I think also because I've got 3 children, one of whom is still relatively young. I find it really genuinely upsetting for myself to write about the death of a child, and that's something that I don't think it's wrong for other people to do it. It's wrong at the moment for me to do it, and it might be that in a few years' time I feel able to do that, but at the moment I just can't. So that's my no-go zone at the moment, actually.
I totally get that, and I know I've done it with my most recent book, and I swore I'd never do it, and it was very, very difficult to write. I think for any writer it would be difficult. If you're a parent, you really do find yourself in that position. So I understand. I know the other big one people say they'll never do is they'll never kill a pet dog. Don't do that. That's the worst thing you can do.
I've done something bad to a horse at one point in one of the books.
I think horses probably get away a bit more, but the dogs, no, that's but it's an absolutely brilliant book, Helen, and I wish you all the success in it. You deserve for this one to go interstellar, and I hope in the future not only are we going to see more of Connie and Barda, that we will also, I hope, I don't know if anything's in the pipeline, but I think this would be amazing on TV or on a film, and for most writers I know that's a bit of a dream to see that. So I hope that dream comes true for you. It certainly deserves it, and congratulations on another brilliant read.
Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you.
Big round of applause for Claire Allan, everyone. Thank you, Claire. Now we've got something a little bit different for you. We have a reading by Robin Laing. So close, Robin, I'm sorry.
So close.
Close. Next time. Born in Dundee, Robin has been an actor on television, film, stage and radio for over 25 years, but he doesn't look a day over 21. He also narrates many audiobooks, including Helen Fields' Callanan novels. So Robin is with us this evening, not only to give us a reading, but to answer some of your questions later if you have any for him. But first of all, he is going to give us a reading from The Shadow Man. So everybody, huge round of applause for Robin Laing.
Fergus Arris was dying. However long he had left, there was insufficient time to achieve everything. He dreamed of travelling. In his 20s, he'd had a world map on his wall. The idea was to scratch off a section of chalky paint every time he took a trip. A school visit to France had offered one country beyond the United Kingdom's borders. Then came a friend's stag weekend in Amsterdam. He'd always wanted to go to the USA, to explore Peru. The Great Wall of China was his ultimate goal. Now, he had to fulfill all of his dying wishes in Scotland. Even the borders were too far to cross at this stage. His body had betrayed him. There was nothing the doctors could do, in spite of their protestations that he should let them assist. He could smell the rot of his own body. No herb or spice could mask the taste of death in his mouth. There was pain and grief. Then there were moments of clarity, when he understood that death would be a release. Months of hospital treatment weren't the answer. Prolonging life, regardless of the quality of that time, was nothing more than fading away. He didn't want to fade away any more than he already had. He wanted to blaze a trail into the next life. But there was so little time, and so much left to do. Starting with Angela. After creeping around the end of the bed and slipping off his shoes, he slid his body weight gently onto the mattress. A smile flitted across Angela's face as his body joined hers. He fitted behind her like a puzzle piece, and she murmured as he slid his arm over her waist, pushing his face gently onto her neck and breathing the scent of her shampoo. She was so warm in his arms, so soft, destined for him. Then she woke, took a breath sharp enough to push Fergus's chest from her back, and every muscle in her body seized. She jolted, but he'd been ready for it. He squeezed his arm around her, dragging her backwards into him, snaking his free hand under her neck and over her mouth. "It's all right," he whispered. "Angela, you have to trust me. I'm not here to hurt you." She tried kicking, going for his shins with her heels, but the sheet hampered the force of her movements, and Fergus shifted his right leg on top of both of hers. Her breath was hot and wet in his hand, and her head was a wild creature whipping left and right. He waited it out. There were no surprises. He'd played the scenario out in his head hundreds, maybe thousands of times. In his pocket was a handkerchief, and on it was a carefully measured dose of chloroform. There were things he wanted to do with Angela, and those things required her not to fight him. Fergus wanted her pristine. "Let it out," he said. "I know you're scared and confused, but I chose you." Angela heaved forwards, rolling her mouth hard onto his fingers and biting down. Fergus tried to keep his grip on her, but his hand betrayed him. His fingers shot straight out, and his wrist flicked backwards, giving Angela the space to bend her head forwards and then smack it backwards into Fergus's face, the rear of her skull a true weapon, splitting Fergus's nose from between his eyes to below the bridge. The pillow became a mess of bloodied hair. He couldn't see, and his face was a mask of agony. Only his right arm and leg remained steadfast, holding her in place. She spat, and a chunk of something warm and soft landed on his hand as he pinned her to the bed. The flesh was from his finger, he realised, as he rolled her onto her back and slid his body on top of hers before she could attempt an escape. "It's all right. Let me help you," he muttered. Blood droplets from his face burst juicily as they hit hers. Angela began to sob. "I'm not cross. Don't cry," Fergus said. Fergus pulled a handkerchief from his pocket with his right hand, shifting his left forearm to rest solidly across her breastbone. She gushed air. "Please, don't." "Hurt you? Why would I? I'm your one true love, Angela." He pressed the handkerchief to her lips. A cotton kiss in the dark. Angela's hips bucked beneath him, and he imagined a different bed, her holding him, wanting him on top of her. Her neck arched. She did her best to fight, but he wanted her compliance more than she wanted her freedom. Desperation had fine-tuned him into an extraordinary beast. He could smell her toothpaste, and it was a field of wild mint. The diamonds in her eyes were more riches than he had ever imagined he would own. Then the bedside lamp was arcing through the air. Had it been switched on, he knew it would have left a rainbow of light in its wake. Even as he saw it coming, he recognised it was too late for avoidance. Shattering on contact with his cheekbone, the pottery base turned gravel and took root in his flesh. Angela fought harder as Fergus swayed, his head a wasp's nest as he reeled from the injuries to his nose and cheek. The important thing was to keep the handkerchief over her mouth until she was asleep, but his hand was trembling and weak, and now he could see two Angelas, neither of them clearly. His hand needed help to maintain the pressure, so he pushed his forehead down on top of his own hand, doubling the force and allowing him to close his eyes for a moment. If he lost consciousness now, it was over. If she got out from under him, he was done. Everything he wanted, what pathetic time he had left, would be smoke. She battered him with one fist. He had to take back control until she complied. With one last monumental effort, Fergus raised his body a few inches, then slammed his whole weight onto her ribcage. He grabbed her wrist with his free hand, and her fingertips scratched weakly at his knuckles. The bed was wet, he realised. His knee rested in a damp, warm patch. That was fine. A success, in fact. She was relaxing, surrendering. His whole head buzzed and burned. Tidal nausea swept over him. Fergus let her hand slide from his grasp as the world pixelated, then faded, his body covering hers like a blanket. The handkerchief, then his hand, and finally his head resting on her mouth. Fergus could resist unconsciousness no longer.
Thank you so much for that, Robin. That was brilliant and also terrifying. I'm just going to refer you back to Good Luck Sleeping, because after that, I think we're all going to be awake tonight. Helen, I believe you have a question for Robin. Is that correct?
I do, actually.
I forgot I should have stayed.
Robin, you should have stayed. Robin, that was really scary. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I wanted to just ask what the process is. I mean, it's not often that we get to talk to the people who narrate books, you know, and kind of how you get your head around so many characters and process that and prepare yourself in advance. So I just wanted to ask a little bit about how, from when you first get the script, you bring it to life and what your preparation is.
Well, first things first, read the book. I know that sounds really obvious, but that's just, you know, you read the book, get a feel for it, maybe jot down some ideas. If you're lucky enough to know the author, have a chat with the author, or have a chat with the producers, in this case, W.F. House, who are wonderful. They do the Callanach books as well, and I work with them on other titles. And then you go back through it, and it takes, it's probably a good day or two, but basically you go through the book and you highlight all the different people in different colours. So you can see here Maggie's in yellow, and Fergus is light blue, and Xavier's a sort of navy blue. And yeah, you go through, and perhaps when characters first appear, you'll maybe make a little note in the margin that says maybe something very specific, maybe something a bit more generic. Sometimes it'll say something, maybe I'll write down the name of another actor that I know, or a character from something else that I know. Or sometimes it'll just say Northern or Geordie. And yeah, and then off you go. And it's just a case of making decisions. Quite often there are clues, which is why it's good to read the book through before you then go through and make decisions about voices. Because quite often you can be reading a character and you'll have an idea in your mind about what they sound like, and then halfway through the book they'll say, you know, she listened intently, enjoying his Hebridean brogue, and you think, oh, okay, so he's not from Sussex, you know. So and that's really the process, and it's the prep is, it's not onerous, but it's quite sort of dogmatic. You're really just working your way through it, highlighting. Once you get into the booth or the studio, that's when the fun starts, and you can start to play.
Thank you.
And Robin, I think you have a question for Helen.
Yes, I wondered. You know, this book and the Perfect series, the Callanach books, are all set in and around the same sort of MIT department. And I wondered if there was a particular station in Edinburgh, or if there was a particular set of characters that you may have worked with when you worked in Edinburgh that inspired the series, without giving anything away.
You know what, it's a really tricky one. And when I was researching the Callanach series, I spoke to the police liaison, their media liaison department, quite a lot about this and where MIT is. And it sounds terribly glamorous. the major investigation team, but it's actually it's actually really not. Obviously St Leonard's is one of the big police stations, and I've deliberately not named the police station because I didn't want to be limited by the geography of it. And there are all sorts of realistic things. I know as soon as if I get into specifics of the geography and the buildings there, I get all sorts of problems. So if I want to grab a car from the carpool at one of the city centre police stations, they don't have them where I want them to be and that sort of thing. So I've been really careful. I can't believe you asked that question. I've never named the police station because actually when I looked at where MIT is and that sort of thing, it didn't quite work for the way I wanted to portray it. And so I've kind of done this kind of fairly generic city centre, Edinburgh city centre police station. But the characters are very much based on police officers I worked with over the years. Not Luke Kavanagh, sadly. He's not based on any police officer I met. He's slightly based on a fireman I once met. Yes, their Fingerless Imagination. Lively, Sergeant Lively from the Kavanagh books is definitely based on officers I work with. In this particular book, I mean, I've been living in America for the last 3 years. So Connie is very much based on, you know, some of the Americans I met, these fiercely bright women who will just look you in the eyes and not meaning to be rude, but they'll just say, I'm so sorry, but you're completely wrong about that. And you kind of go, oh, good, thanks. And they don't mean it rudely. It's just a way of communicating, which is just extremely direct. Yeah, so that's it. You threw me with the, don't do the police station thing. Okay. But thank you very much. And you're doing another reading, aren't you, Vic?
I am.
Yeah,
I'll be back later in the show.
Oh.
Yes, and I will endeavour to get your name correct, Robin. Thank you.
That's okay, Ms. Watson.
Thank you. Very good. We are going to go from Robin straight to Ros Watkins, who is the author of the D.I. Meg Dalton crime series set in the Peak District. The latest book, Cut to the Bone, is out now.
Hi Helen, hi everyone. Absolutely lovely to be here. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I love the book. Just really raced through it, found it absolutely fascinating. I'm a bit of a one myself for weird medical conditions. Sort of used to read a lot about Oliver Sacks and all this sort of weird neurological stuff. So I actually knew about cotards, and it was like, yay, he's got cotards. So my main question really is, what was it like to get inside the head of somebody like that? He's such a fascinating character. He's that, as you were saying earlier, this sort of combination of being really, really awful, but also somewhat sympathetic. So how was it to actually sort of get in his head and write that point of view?
Hi, Ros. Thank you, first of all. Thank you for being here. Yes, so Fergus Arris was really complicated. And actually, it was one of those where I didn't have a very clear feeling for him when I started writing. You know, usually you can see your antagonist quite clearly in your own mind when you, at the get-go. And I didn't. It's the first time I've had that problem. And actually, I realized it was because I think by then, even when we start off, he's so psychologically damaged right from the start that getting inside his head was quite complex, because so little of what he was seeing and thinking and that I was hearing from him was his reality. So I think the challenge for me was getting inside the head of someone whose world is completely false and wrong. He thinks he's dying. He believes he is dying or dead. And that was a real challenge, actually. And then I realized that also, because he goes downhill so rapidly through the whole book, is that I didn't have a clear picture of him at the start, because he was literally disintegrating physically and mentally as we went along. And so his voice was this real mishmash of kind of confused desperation all the way through. it made it both hard to write it, and it made it a bit of a joy to write, because actually you give yourself quite a lot of liberty in terms of where you can take that and where you can go with it, and how he feels. I always think what's really difficult about writing incredibly dangerous, deranged, psychologically messed up people is that, for the most part, when we write those people, we only think about them as serial killers or as, you know, these dangerous fiends who are violent, but we don't ever think about the fact that they still go to the shop and buy milk in the morning, or that they still have a favorite TV program, or they still do they prefer a shower or a bath? And one of the things I find really interesting when I'm writing these kind of characters is to see them as a whole, and not to pigeonhole them into that point in time when they kill, which is maybe a sort of, you know, a couple of hour periods in a 6-month period. But then they've got the whole of the rest of that 6 months where they, maybe they're not properly integrated in society, but they still exist, you know, they still think about TV licenses and things the rest of us. And what's really interesting is how they see the normal world, how they cope in the normal world. Sometimes it's less interesting when they're doing the killing, because when they're doing extreme things, I think we all have a really clear idea of what that looks like. I don't think most of us have a clear idea of what it's like to be inside the head of a serial killer the rest of the time when they're walking down the street. So that's the interesting bit for me. Fergus from the start was just this confused, messed up voice who had become completely self-obsessed because of the syndrome he was going through. And you're right, it was the toughest one I've ever written, was to try and be inside the head of somebody who honestly believes he's dead, and to make that believable. That was the really hard bit, to make that voice convincing. That was tough. And you do much the same thing. You and I have a similar writing style.
It did come over really well, that disintegration of him sort of physically and emotionally. So yeah, that was really fascinating. So was it a light relief then to get into the other, because you had several points of view, didn't you? Was it a relief to get out of Fergus and into one of the other characters?
Yeah, it was. And that's why I think that's why Connie is so direct and so brash, and so what you see is what you get, actually, because I needed a complete foil to Fergus. So I couldn't have somebody who was terribly introspective or terribly confused or terribly worried. She had to be, you know, an absolute foil to him when I was writing her. And I think it made her more blunt than it would otherwise have been, because, you know, Fergus kind of just talks in his own head around himself the whole time. And of course, the one thing she doesn't do is she makes a decision, she goes for it, and she follows an instinct, and it's a very straight path. So that was, you know, it was interesting to write the difference, and it was light relief, especially kind of Meggie, who I think is my favorite character from this, possibly the most grown-up character in some ways. It's quite an odd thing writing. I haven't written from the perspective of a child before. It's quite a challenge to do that. But she became more interesting as I was writing her.
Yeah, she was a great character as well. I loved her.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you. I've got to say, I got told off this week I got told off on Twitter for not having told an amazing bookseller about your books. I got my wrist actually slapped by Fiona, who's reading one of your books. And obviously you and I are similar, because she came straight to me and said, why haven't you told me about Rolls Watkins? I didn't realise I was supposed to be telling booksellers, but I will from now on, because I think, you know, we write very similar, in very similar ways.
Oh, well, I'm very flattered by that. Thank you. Thank you.
No, I am.
You should be telling all booksellers. Yes.
I will. It's going to be my mission for the next year, is making sure. Thank you, Rose.
Oh, I feel like I feel like I could chat all day about this book, but I've been strictly limited to 2 questions. That's me done. Congratulations again.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us, Rose. That was brilliant. Just so you all know, this evening you will be entered into our randomly selected prize draw. We have some Shadow Man goodies to give away. So just simply by attending this event tonight, you will all be entered into our giveaway. And we will be notifying you by email in the next few days if you are a winner. I'm going to get on with it. We've got some more questions, this time from Caroline Green. Caroline Green is a Sunday Times best-selling author based in London who writes for both young people and adults. Her latest adult crime novel, Sleep Tight, is out on March the 4th. So everyone, huge round of applause for Caroline Green.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Helen, huge congratulations on your fantastic book. It's a shame we can't have real launch parties with glasses of wine and standing around, but this is very much the next best thing. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the writing process. As somebody who with great trepidation is going in the other direction, from standalone fiction to a series, I wondered how you found that process, and whether it's liberating, whether it's scary, not having those characters that you know so well. So how did you find that?
Hello, Caroline. Thank you so much for being here. Yes, it was both of those things. So it's both liberating because I suddenly was able to rethink. One of the things about writing a series, and it's been 6 books now, is that you develop a backstory, and it's really easy to get that wrong. And quite often I'm there thinking, okay, who's crossed paths with who, and at what stage did this happen, and what does this person know? And so the problem with the series for me is, and I don't know how the long-term guys do it, so kind of things like Rebus, you know, and Val McDermott's series and things like that, they develop such a big backstory that I think that's really difficult. So it was really nice to be able to do something afresh and not have to be thinking, does that make sense? What's the timeline? You know, and also because I very much approached it as a complete standalone, I wasn't having to think, right, how do I leave the space for these characters to develop over 2 or 3 books? So one of the things you'll be thinking about at the moment is, okay, it's not just one book. These characters have to have some longevity. They have to, whatever they do, there are going to be consequences for. So if you have a character who shoots someone, they're going to be either in prison or on the run. It's going to be one or the other. You know, they're going to be off the page for quite a long time. And there are consequences when you're writing a series. And it was nice, really nice, not to have that. What I did, in fact, was I brought in a couple of the characters from the Kallanak series, and I dropped them into the Shadow Man. That was really good fun, because then I've got the ability just to, first of all, to say to the readers of the series who have swapped over to the Shadow Man with me, thank you very much, here's something familiar. And that's nice. That I think I like it when I read series where, as a long-term reader, you are treated to a little bit of insight, and you get something out of the book that people who've just come into a cold don't get. So people who've read the Kallanak series will get something, a little extra thing out of the Shadow Man, because there are a couple of familiar characters in there. That was just really good fun to be able to write that in. But it also gave me a sense of grounding the Shadow Man within the geography and the space, the professional space of the Kallanak. So I had a little bit of familiarity and a little bit of something, because I just picked and chose a couple of the really fun characters. And so that was great fun. I mean, I think it's a difficult thing to go from one to the other, because it's a different style of writing as well, I think. And that's something that didn't occur to me until I tried to write this as a standalone, is that it's very immediate. It's a single book. It's going to close itself down. And you don't have to, well, you can't leave characters' lives as open. You haven't got this kind of ongoing conversation that you have with your characters as a writer. It has to be closed down. But it was liberating being able to write standalone. It was really good fun, because you can write, when you write standalone, you write one big single punch. It's not a kind of ongoing little fight. It's kind of just a big explosion. And I found it really good fun, actually. Very surprised by how many people are asking for more, you know, more Connie Woolwine and Brodie Barder. And I think all that is that I had so much fun with them. And you know, when you're writing, that if you're having really good fun with a character, it's not the story that people don't want more of the story. They just want a little bit more. They want to see more deeply into those people's lives. That's the beauty of the series. And I'm sure that's what you're going to find, is that you get to really, really invest in people's lives. And even though it was a standalone, I certainly did that with the Shadow Man.
Well, it was tremendously useful for me. Thank you very much for indulging me. I wish I'd spoken to you before I'd started writing it. That's very, very useful. And my other question is, I just want you to have a little think about dream casting. So if you had all the money in the world, you had any actors in the world, who would be your dream casting, particularly for Connie and Barda and Fergus?
Brodie Barda's easy. He's fairly Dominic West, who is that kind of the same age, Eton educated, and he can do those quiet characters really, really well. He's not very popular at the moment. It's a tricky one to say. He's received some bad press lately, and my choice of him is not his current behaviour. But you can see that there's a type with Brodie Barda. I really struggle with who would be Connie Woolwine, because a lot of I think she's got to be authentically American. A lot of the American actresses kind of in their sort of, early to mid 30s are these very glamorous types. And while I think she can have that about her, she's somebody who chooses not to. She exists for her brain, she exists for her job, she exists for the process. And that's really, if you've got any ideas for Connie, I find that really difficult.
I'm not sure. I find it difficult enough for my own characters, really. I think I tend to have a kind of amalgamations of people in mind. I think I'll see somebody, I think, oh, they're a little bit of them and a little bit of them, and I kind of put them together. But yeah. There's always a good bit of procrastination and fun, isn't it, when you're supposed to be actually writing?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Well, if anybody listening to this has got any great ideas for who should play Connie Woolwine, then write them in the panel. But yes, I mean, I like Natalie Portman has got that real intelligence about her. If she was English, I would say someone like Carey Mulligan. Yes, Natalie Portman would probably do the best job of someone I can think of who fits that kind of super intelligent, very direct type.
I'm sure she'll be up for it. I'm sure she'll be up for it.
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to message her later. And maybe Fergus, I don't know, James McElroy. What am I? James McAvoy. My brain's going. Oh, nice. I've only had half a glass. I can't remember anyone's names. James McAvoy.
Yes, good choice.
Pretty good Fergus, I think.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm being rounded up here by Vic. So
no, I've actually jumped in because our Simon has suggested Anna Kendrick, and I think
I love Anna Kendrick.
I'm with Anna. I'm with Simon on this. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you very much, and I'm wishing you so much luck with your fantastic book.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Brill. Thank you. And now we're going back to Robin Laing for another reading. So everybody, Robin.
Well done, Vic. Meggie swung from the ceiling. Her body was beginning to ache, and she could hear Xavier's increasingly laboured breathing from the floor above. The droplets of sweat that was soaking into the sheet rope were making it hard to grasp. Fergus stood below her, grinning. He was insane. It was a word she'd read and heard, but so far in her 12 years she'd never actually met anyone who matched the description. His eyes looked like they might extend from his head at any moment on wild tentacles, reaching up to inspect her more closely. Hands twitching at his sides, body coated in oily perspiration, he appeared to Meggie as if he'd just emerged from a coffin. There was so little of him, and yet she knew that his strength would be formidable. It was a playground assessment, but no less accurate for it. At school, there were the physically large kids who nevertheless posed no threat. They lumbered and were slow, and the majority had a gentleness about them that they could not hide from the slighter, slipperier bullies. They were fast and mean, and their viciousness was an emerald flash in the eyes, side-glancing to their mates. "Watch this," that swipe of vision said. "Watch this and play your part. Titter at my cruelty, taunt my prey and worship me, or it'll be you next." Still, The bullies weren't the scariest. They were a known quantity. Their showmanship hid a vulnerability. Get anyone else to laugh at them, just for a single second, and you might as well have thrown that iconic bucket of water over the Wicked Witch of the West. The playground hustle and bickering was camouflage for a genuine monster. Those who had no fear of consequences. Whose older siblings had shown them just how brutal a beating could really be. Silent and deadly. A misused phrase, but that was how she'd always thought of them. Mitch McConnett had once got wind of the fact that another boy had been telling his friends how much he fancied Mitch. That boy had been held down in an alleyway after school and a lighter applied to his hair, necessitating skin grafts for the burns. Tricia Lee, another quiet one everyone knew to avoid, had decided that being called weird was sufficient cause for smashing a bottle and shoving it into another girl's forehead. No amount of surgery was going to remove the scarring. It was the ones who could watch and wait, with whom no amount of pleading made a difference. They didn't want an audience or adulation. They wanted a quiet place, relative dark, and the time to enjoy the whimpering of their victim. Maggie stared down at Fergus and let her terror inform her decision. "I'm not coming down," she told him, "and you can't reach me." "Fine," he said. "You'll keep. It's not as if you're going anywhere after all. How's it going, Xavier?" he yelled gleefully. There was silence from the floor above. "Getting tired yet? Or have you just tied off the sheet? She'll slip, sooner or later, and when she does, she could break a limb. Maybe fracture a hip. Perhaps little Maggie will even damage her spinal cord so badly that she'll end up just like you." "Don't listen to him," Maggie told Xavier. "Come back up," Xavier whispered. "I can't pull you. You're going to have to climb." Maggie looked up at the ceiling. "You don't have the strength left in your arms, do you?" Fergus hissed. "How long have you been there?" "Not as long as Elspeth has been on this cold floor, waiting for help." He raised a foot and allowed his toes to rest on the unnaturally bent shoulder joint. "Perhaps I can persuade you to join us." Elspeth's shriek, as he applied pressure with his foot, was subhuman. Maggie was reminded of a trip to a safari park where she'd heard wolves howling as they'd fought over food. The bedding rope jolted upwards as Xavier tried to yank her skywards. "That's right. Up you go," Fergus said. "You two run and hide. I'll be up shortly." "You're a fuckhead," Maggie screeched. "A fucking bloody fuckhead." "Maggie, get up here. The door's blocked. You'll be safe," Xavier shouted. Maggie looked up and down. Fergus giggled and wagged his finger at her. "You're a bad girl." Elspeth growled as she turned her head to where Fergus's foot was still pressed on the back of her dislocated shoulder. Dropping her jaw, she latched onto his ankle and bit. "Bitch!" Fergus screamed. "Oh my God, you evil bitch, let go!" Her damaged arm flopped uselessly to one side. She grabbed his free leg with her good hand, keeping him still. Fergus bent to beat her across the head and face, fists flying as he tried to pull his leg away. "Let me go," Maggie yelled at Xavier. "No way," he replied. "He'll kill her," the girl said, working her fingers into the knot she had tied around her waist. "He'll kill you too." Xavier gripped harder than ever. "Get up here, Maggie, please." "I want to," she sobbed. "I want to come back. But he cut off her finger because of me. It was all my fault. She stopped him from hurting me. I'm sorry." She gulped deep breaths, then released her grip on the sheet and dropped through thin air out of the loop.
Well, Robin, thank you for that. I am now terrified. We do have one question for you from Alex Hawley.
Sure.
And I think I know what your answer is going to be to this, but I'll put it to you. As a narrator, what do you find is your biggest challenge when narrating?
Geordie.
That wasn't what I was expecting.
The biggest challenge. I think it's probably, I really enjoy it. So it's not a challenge to do it or keep going or keep motivated. Nothing like that. I think the biggest, not necessarily Geordie, but the biggest challenge is when in a book, it's stipulated that someone is from somewhere and you can't get out of it. And I'm not bad with accents. You know, I can turn my hand to a passable, for audiobook, no one's expecting every accent to be absolutely bang on and sound like the person's from that place. But so I can turn my hand to most accents, but there are a few that can be troublesome. Or the only other thing is, and this didn't happen with Fergus, but I did get to the point where I thought I might be in trouble here because I decided to do that thing with my voice. At the end of, it took me about 5 days, I think, to record a couple of hours each day. Excuse me. And I think by about the end of day 3, I was thinking, I came down and, my wife said to me, "How's it going?" I said, "Yeah, I think it's going really well, yeah." And she was a bit like, "What's happened to your voice?" I said, I'm not really sure. I think I may have slightly overdone it. But I sounded a bit like Barry White, she said. But it was fine. The next morning, I just rested for the rest of the day. And you always think you're losing your voice, and I haven't yet. So
some would use it as an excuse for hot toddies with whiskey and honey, but you just said rest. So we'll go with that. Thank you.
Plenty of rest.
Thank you very much for joining.
Great question, Alex, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you. So Helen, if you would like to pop back on as well, we have your final guest interviewer of this evening. We have the lovely Neil Broadfoot, whose series featuring clothes protection expert Connor Fraser has been hailed as tense, fast-paced and bloody. The third in the series, The Point of No Return, is available now. So here's Neil.
Evening, everybody. Hi, Helen. How you doing?
I am good, thank you.
Good.
Hello.
Firstly, congratulations on the book. I think I said at the time on Twitter, it deserves everyone. I got a really nice proof with all these inlays, with all these lovely superlatives in it, which embarrassed the hell out of you. It's a real read in one sitting, grabs you by the scruff of the neck, will not let you go. And thank you for one of the most disturbing intros I've ever read in a book. But it reminded me of another standalone you did, which was Degrees of Guilt, where it basically the intro comes in and just smacks you in the face and says, right, read me. I'm not leaving you alone here. But what I wanted to ask specifically in relation to this one, in relation with Fergus, was, I think he says in the intro, so little time, I've got so little time. And you see throughout the book this, he's completely unraveling physically and psychologically. How difficult was it to keep that pace going for 90,000, 100,000 words for an entire book and keep that without it? Because it doesn't lag. That's one of the things about this book. It grabs you and it keeps you there right until the last page. But how difficult was it to keep that pacing up? And how important was it for the character for you to keep that up?
Well, thank you, first of all. I'm glad it worked. It was really difficult because he's quite deranged. And there's danger with a very deranged character that every time you come in and write a chapter from their perspective is that you're kind of writing the same thing almost every time. So there had to be a timeline whereby he went downhill. You had to be able to kind of see him in very specific stages going downhill. And that was really important. It's the reason why the book's written from multiple perspectives, because actually the way to maintain pace when you've got something that's quite high pressure and you're on a kind of timeline is to be able to shift to other people. And quite often within the book, you're going from him doing something, or him finally collapsing into a sleep, and then that the other characters who are being held have a certain amount of hours to try and figure out what they're going to do, try and escape, try and get through the floorboards. I think pacing is the most difficult thing. This with writing a compelling crime book, pacing is always the thing. And the perspectives really helped me, and seeing different characters. And it was a gift, because I was able to go from my profiler and my police officer to the other people stuck in the flat, and then to Fergus. I think the only reason I managed the pacing was because I was able to shift perspectives. And so in terms of the kind of countdown clock, as both an author and a reader, that you have going in your head from when you turn the first page, there's always a countdown. I was able to account for those hours passing much more easily. If I'd had to spend very much more time inside Fergus's head with his voice, that would have gotten very, very difficult indeed. So I cheated and I went to other people. It's the answer.
How much, I know that Simon's going to jump in, but one thing I want to ask is, how much of that was instinctual? And you talked about timeline. How much of the shifting perspective was, right, I've got Fergus, then I'm going to go here, then I'm going to go there. And how much it was, I've got the pressure cooker here, I have to move perspective for my own, I have to get out of his head for a while and write something else. So how much of it was instinctual and how much of it was timelined, as it were? It
was mostly instinctual. And I think you're a pantser as well.
That is the correct answer.
It was, same as you, right? So you feel it. And I think when you write like that, when you're at the end of a chapter, and when your readers are going to have had enough of that character's voice. And then you have to go to someone else, but you have to go to someone else at a point where they're in the pressure cooker from their end. So it's about actually shifting between chapters to a point that makes sense, but that also is another point of drama. I think the challenge in the book, and it's, without putting people off, about best part of 110,000 words. It's quite a long book. And the real challenge in it is to keep that drama up. And of course, as you do with Conor Fraser, there are two ways of doing it. One is action and one is emotion. Some of that is backstory emotion. Some of that is current relationships. Some of it's what they want or what they're trying to get away from. And it doesn't matter whether you're dropping into action or you're dropping to a high emotion. You have to constantly drop into one of those two things. Of course, when you've got 3 people who've been kidnapped and they've shoved in a flat and they're trying to escape, the drama kind of does itself. That's why, equally, that's why the book opens on a character who doesn't really reappear, because her accidental death, as it turned out, had to set the stakes for what could go wrong for the other 3 of them. And I won't give any spoilers. There are other reasons as they're trying to escape, they find out how high those stakes are. But yes, I mean, pacing is always always the tricky thing. And it's the same with Conor. I mean, you've got 3 books now that keep coming back to the same character. And it's tough because you have to maintain that emotional level of drama with them over a long period of time. I mean, how do you do that?
If I knew, I'd tell you. I just wing it and hope for the best. I have a rough idea and I just go. Anyway, tonight is not about me, it's about you, and a book that should hopefully scoop every award going and be on every long list and short list going this year. And I think Vic's going to come in and start asking people questions at that point, or at least I've got a message saying, shut up, Neil. There's more one-syllable words than that, but I will now shut up.
Thank you very much, Neil. That was brilliant. I know, Helen, that people are definitely having trouble sleeping after Robin's narration.
Can I just say, Robin is terrifying. I haven't heard him do that. I haven't heard the audiobook version. He is absolutely terrifying. Bless him. Not as a person, he's a nice person.
Glorious chap, but yes, I definitely wanted to hide under the tables. I'm going to do some quick fire questions from our audience, and then I've got one really quick one from me, and then it's time for you to go and enjoy your evening. Keith Young would like to know if we will be seeing Inspector Luke back on our shores in the future.
You know what? It's the million-dollar question. I am absolutely sure that Luke Kalanick will be making a reappearance. I've been writing short stories. I'm writing another one tomorrow. And the thing about that is that it's not just for the sake of it, it's because those characters are still alive and well in my mind. Their lives are ongoing. I think it might take a different format. I think it might look a little bit less like Perfect Something or Other. I think it might look like a bigger, splashier standalone. But
Interesting.
It will be Luke and Ada and Sergeant Lively.
Excellent. There will be many people in the audience delighted to hear that. Rose has asked, and I think you've answered this with Neil, how much of a novel do you need to know before you start to write it?
I need to know the character of my protagonist quite well. I need to know what is motivating my antagonist. I don't need to know everything about him or her. And I need to know what their kind of modus operandi is. And I need to know what's at stake. The number of people who die, how horrible it gets, all those sorts of things, that just happens as we go. I can't help it. Sometimes I just end up killing somebody completely accidentally in the middle of a chapter. But I have to have a feel for the flavor of the reason somebody is doing bad things. That's my starting point.
Thank you. Manon Bradley has said, has lockdown impacted your writing, and do you think it's made a difference?
It has. I'm going to cheat. Can I do something? Lockdown's a nightmare. Lockdown's a nightmare. Creativity, it should be easy because writers just stay at home and are boring people anyway. It's not that easy. I want to do something here because Manon is a very, very, very special person. She is there. Manon has become a friend through somebody else. I'm going to read something from page 136, 107. Manon doesn't know this is there. And it's from Meggie. It's when Meggie Roussel, who is named for Meggie Roussel, the blogger, for those of you who know her. Little Meggie is actually a slightly bigger Meggie in real life. This is where Meggie is assessing her relationship with Elspeth and the fact that she's found herself incarcerated effectively with this woman who's a socialite but really no use at all. Still, Meggie thought Elspeth was beautiful, sweet and kind and beautiful. It would have been better, of course, to have landed in this situation with a female survival expert like Megan Hine, an Olympic martial arts gold medalist like Kayla Harrison, or world champion powerlifter Manon Bradley. And one of the really beautiful things about being an author is that just occasionally you are able to pay tribute to the people who inspire you. Manon, there you go.
Oh, that's so lovely. I have one more question from our audience. Louise Cannon would like to know, you wrote about the use of hypnosis in The Shadow Man. What research did you do, or did you already know about this method?
I didn't know very much about it. I did do some research. It was slightly by the by. It's easier than you think to research, easier to do. I got to tell you that my cousin, when we were at school, and he was 15 years old, he's now a plastic surgeon in New Zealand. He researched how to hypnotize people, asked for a volunteer from his class, successfully hypnotized one of his classmates and couldn't get her out of it. And it's not like you can pop to A&E and say, we need a hypnotist. So I've been fascinated by hypnosis since my cousin did that, and he got expelled from school for successfully hypnotizing a fellow people. It's bizarre, but yes, there's a little bit of hypnosis in there. It's you know, the problem with hypnosis is that there's a lot of rubbish, a lot of fakery about it, but actually at its heart there are some really interesting psychological issues to do with hypnosis, and it's something that I think I will probably come back to in future books.
Brilliant, thank you. And my final question for this evening is, what's next for Helen Fields? Once The Shadow Man has won all the awards, like Neil Broadfoot says, what's next for you, Helen?
Well, there's a book that I've already finished writing. I'm just, you know, in the later stages of editing, set on Mull. And that has a Canadian protagonist who's a private investigator. And that has elements of what I can only call witchcraft. So that's a bit of a departure from me, but it still does have Lance Proudfoot, my journalist from the Kalanack series, in it, who plays a key part, and it's still got a familiar level of gore and that sort of thing. So that is coming up next year. That's very exciting. And at the moment, we're somewhere that feels like this. Will it be a Kalanack? It might well be. Will it be a return of Connie Woolwine and Brodie Barder, or will it be another complete standalone? Who knows? Watch this space. It's very exciting.
Like a true crime writer, you've left us on a cliffhanger. Thank you. I would like to thank lovely Helen Fields and give you a huge round of applause for what is a fabulous read that I couldn't put down, but I was reading it under the covers, but was terrified, didn't want it to end, also didn't want to look. So thank you, brilliant read. I'm sure it's going to do fabulously. We would also like to thank Avon Books, Claire Allan, Robin Laing, Ros Watkins, Caroline Green, Neil Broadfoot, and Simon Buick behind the scenes, because we haven't seen him, but he's kept everything going. Don't forget to order your copy of The Shadow Man from Forum Books to receive a signed book plate from Helen. And if you have enjoyed tonight's event, please do check out baytales.com. The information is on our final slide, because we have the next 2 Wednesdays coming up. We have some events with Anne Cleves, Steve Kavanagh, Neil Broadfoot, you know, just these up and coming writers that you might want to find out about. But tonight, Helen, is for you. So congratulations. May the Shadow Man fly, and hope to see you very, very soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Vic. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, absolutely everyone, and especially everyone who's come and watched us and listened to us talk. Thank you very, very much.
Night, night.